So I was going to ask you, like, what are the signs to spot, like, how do you know there's a narcissist? And, you mentioned that there's a lot of different flavors, but I wonder if the answer to the question is spot it within yourself. Are you not
Good.
sleeping well? Are you feeling crazy?
Yes.
Are you like, because you'll know if you're around somebody who's reasonable, like you could have a conversation with somebody that you're not, but maybe the signs are not what you see, but it's
Yeah.
what you feel and what you
Yeah.
experience that will tell you everything that you need to know if you're in the presence of a narcissist.
That's so good. That's so important. And what you're doing, I think, in saying that, Betsy, is like validating people who are experiencing these things. Like any one of us who know the experience of working for someone who's abusive knows some element of being cut off from our own bodies and emotions. Like we start to gaslight ourselves, and we might
Mm-hmm.
even justify it. I'm too sensitive. I'm making a big deal out of this. I shouldn't complain so much. It has nothing to do with him. It has everything to do with me. We get cut off from our bodies and from our emotions. And so at least part of it is beginning to take um, some of the data that we're getting from our bodies seriously. You and I were talking beforehand about the great book, The Body Keeps the Score, a really important one that I think has helped us understand how trauma gets locked in our bodies. And so you're spot on. We've got to notice what's happening within us.
And I think about going back in time with that one particular client, or, like I've been in narcissistic relationships, and in a romantic standpoint, and the signs, like you could tell, like the signs were there, but it's just like you gaslight yourself out of it. It's like, well, I want to believe the best. Like with that particular client, I knew from the negotiation that this was not going to be somebody that respected me, and it was somebody who's going to try to control it, but I didn't listen to myself, and I think about every horrible client
Yeah.
situation is it all started during the contracting situation. Yeah, all the signs were there when I was negotiating with them, but I just didn't trust
Yeah.
it. Like, why do we gaslight ourselves? Like, why do we talk ourselves out of what we see?
Yeah, I mean that's I think that's what we need to tease out with our therapists when we start to do this work with a mentor, a friend, a spiritual director, someone who understands trauma really. And that oftentimes goes back to our own stories. I grew up in a home where my emotions weren't really seen, known, validated in particular kinds of ways, and so I became an adult who wasn't in tune with what was happening within. It's not to blame my parents or anything like that, but I realized I was kind of set up for this. And so as I began to pay attention, uh, I was able to kind of shift from a posture of gaslighting myself to a posture of, ouch, this hurts. This
Mm-hmm.
really, really hurts. And okay, so now I need to decide what do I want to do about that? Well, first, I want to begin to heal these wounds within. And then I may need to make a decision about whether or not I stay in the company or whether or not there is a process. Maybe there are other people. I know, there have been, as you know, many different stories that have come out about uh, small churches and large churches, let alone organizations and institutions in the religious world where there have been narcissistic leadership. And I remember talking to a group of people, a group of women in particular, who their stories went back decades. Like they were saying to themselves, like, we literally have been in this for what the longest was, I think, 27 years. And the tears that came with that, but also that shift from um, denying what they were experiencing and gaslighting themselves to no, ouch, this really hurts, and I will not allow this to continue to happen.
I think the other part though that makes it even more hard to validate though is because the narcissist person usually has a charismatic personality of some kind where they're like everybody likes them, or the public
Yeah.
persona is attractive. Like I remember like I did church consulting. So one of my early when I was a new consultant, I was consulting actually with a couple different churches at the same time. And one of them was a mega church. And this pastor like was put up on this pedestal. Like I couldn't walk with him from one side of the parking lot to the other without everyone's like, Pastor, 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 Pastor. And they
Mm.
elevated him like, oh, he doesn't struggle like other people.
Yeah.
And it is not surprising, like a few years later, all kinds of stuff came out about him. But it's like, I wonder sometimes it's like this cult of celebrity is like we put them up on
Yeah.
the pedestal and then they start believing their PR and there's all these other people. And then you wonder, like, well, what's wrong with me? everybody
Yeah.
else seems to love them because they kind of surround themselves with this harem, and it's this
Yeah.
crazy making scenario. So I
Yeah.
wonder, like, what's the dynamic of like we treat our executives like somebody's in a CEO and it's like, oh, you can do no wrong. And, we worship them. And then we wonder why they believe the
Yeah.
PR.
Yeah, yeah. There's a man named Gerald Post who did some writing on the dynamic between the narcissist and the follower. And he said, the narcissist is mirror hungry. In other words, the audience becomes the mirror. The people in his life become the mirror. Feed me, feed me, feed me. Tell me what I need to hear. But the follower is ideal hungry, which is to say, there are certain needs met for security, for belonging, for some sense of power amidst maybe some sense of disempowerment. And this is, by the way, not to in any way blame victims of narcissists, but it is for us. And I had to do this work. It wasn't to say it was your fault, Chuck, but it was to say there were particular needs that were being met for me when I had attached myself to a narcissistic leader. Um, and the reality is that sometimes we've seen this play out in any number of different situations across churches and organizations, corporations. Sometimes you begin to look like the narcissistic leader. And so I had to ask myself, in my plugging into him for a sense of identity, belonging, security, power, purpose, how did I even begin to look like him? So it does involve some humbling work on ourselves.
Well, and also to understand like what's the like where those hooks are. Cause like sometimes like with some people, who go into a work situation, it's like, well, that person's kind of a jerk narcissistic leader. I'm out of here. And then there's the other ones like, I could change him. I'm gonna work alongside. I'll give coaching. I'll confront him. And
Yeah,
that like those are two different dynamics because one person has boundaries and the other person doesn't. And you got to
yeah,
explore like, well, why is this so hard for you? Like I had to explore that for myself. Like
yeah,
one of the things I recently discovered is I'm a HSP. I'm a highly sensitive person.
yeah. Same.
And oh, you are. Oh,
Oh,
welcome.
yes. Oh, yeah.
I did my whole life made sense. Like I need to do a whole podcast on this one. Like my whole life makes sense. Like I understand and I'm an INFJ.
Yeah,
And as with my personality, I'm the most overrepresented to be in narcissistic relationships. Like, and now I see my entire consulting career trying to save these narcissistic leaders one after the other. I'm like, what was I like? My whole dysfunction is like coming into light, where like protecting myself was just not my thing,
yeah,
like learning how to get that second skin. So, like, what are some tips? Like, when you think about, like, not everybody's
yeah.
wired like you and I, but like, what are tips that we have to guard ourselves and to kind of like, grow that extra set of, you know,
Yeah,
I don't know the right word because I wouldn't,
yeah. No, I hear that. And as a fellow HSP and INFJ, which is interesting, right? I've found myself in similar situations. And what I notice is, just by way of what are tips? What my question is, what might you notice about what's happening within you as you're in relationship